My name is Cassandra Mitchell, 28 years old, and I will never forget the burning humiliation as my father's hand struck my face in front of our entire family at the annual Mitchell Enterprises Gala. "You are no daughter of mine," he spat, tearing my inheritance papers before security escorted me out. 2 days later, his lawyer informed me I was completely cut from the $230 million will. I had no idea why he suddenly hated me until 3 mysterious attorneys showed up at my apartment door with DNA tests and decades-old missing person files. My entire life was a lie. If you have ever felt betrayed by family, you might relate to what I am about to share, though I hope your experience was not quite as extreme as mine. Before I continue this shocking story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit subscribe to join others who appreciate these deeply personal family stories. Trust me, what happened next in this nightmare changed everything I thought I knew about myself. From the outside, the Mitchell family had it all. My father, Richard Mitchell, was the epitome of the American dream, a self-made tech mogul who built Mitchell Enterprises from his garage into a $230 million empire. Our family portrait showed up in Seattle Business Monthly regularly, always with the same caption: "The Mitchells, Innovation, Philanthropy, Legacy." Dad's annual charity gala for children's education raised millions. Mom chaired 3 nonprofit boards. We were that family. Our sprawling estate in Medina overlooked Lake Washington, with the Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. I grew up with all the privileges you would expect: lakeside school education, horseback riding lessons, summers in the Hamptons and winters in Aspen. My credit card had no limit. My closet housed designer labels exclusively. My Sweet 16 featured a private performance by a Grammy winner I am not allowed to name due to the NDA we signed. But wealth cannot buy warmth. Richard Mitchell ran our family like one of his companies, with high expectations, conditional approval, and an obsession with appearances. He was not violent, but his disappointment cut deeper than any physical wound could. "Cassandra," he would say, examining my straight. "As with a frown, these results are acceptable. James would have done better." James, my older brother, was the golden child. At 30, he was already Dad's right-hand man, being groomed to take over Mitchell Enterprises with his Harvard MBA and natural business instinct. James mirrored our father in every way, from his sharp business suits to his calculating approach to relationships. "Nothing personal, Cass, just business," became his catchphrase whenever he outmaneuvered me for Dad's approval. Then there was Amanda, my younger sister. At 25, she was the family rebel on the surface, with her ever-changing hair colors and tabloid appearances at exclusive clubs. Yet somehow, her wild antics only seemed to endear her to our father. "At least Amanda knows how to enjoy life," Dad would say after bailing her out of whatever mess she had created. The rules were different for her, as they often are for the baby of the family. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect corporate wife, elegant, poised, and emotionally unavailable. Her calendar was filled with charity luncheons and gallery openings, leaving little time for maternal connection. When I sought her attention as a child, her standard response was, "Not now, darling. I have the Children's Hospital benefit to organize." The irony of her dedicating time to other children while neglecting her own was not lost on me even then. As the middle child, I carved out my role as the responsible, achievement-oriented daughter. I graduated with honors in architectural engineering from MIT and joined a prestigious firm in Seattle. I volunteered for the right causes, dated suitable men, and never caused a public scandal. I was desperate for my father's approval, working twice as hard as my siblings for half the recognition. Despite my efforts to be the perfect daughter, there were always strange undercurrents in our family dynamic. Certain topics were off limits. Old photo albums mysteriously disappeared when I asked about my early childhood. Family medical history was a forbidden conversation. When I mentioned meeting my mother's parents for a school genealogy project, Eleanor had a near breakdown, claiming they had died years ago with no surviving relatives. There were other oddities. A locked room in our lake house that no one acknowledged, my father's insistence on personally approving all my medical treatments, even into adulthood. The peculiar annual business trip my parents took every April 22nd, returning with red-rimmed eyes and somber moods. I dismissed these peculiarities, focusing instead on building my career and earning my place in the family business. When Dad announced he was establishing a new architectural division at Mitchell Enterprises to develop sustainable corporate campuses, I saw my opportunity. I pitched him comprehensive plans, demonstrating how my expertise could elevate the company's profile in the green building sector. After months of persuasion, he finally agreed to hire me as the division's director. That victory felt monumental. Finally, I would work alongside James, proving my worth to the Mitchell legacy. For 2 years, I poured everything into making the division successful. We won awards for innovation, secured major contracts, and significantly increased company profits. I thought I was finally earning my place in the family. Everything seemed to be building toward the 40th anniversary gala for Mitchell Enterprises. It was to be the most extravagant event in Seattle that year, with over 500 guests including tech moguls, politicians, and celebrities. Dad had hinted at important family announcements during his keynote speech. James assured me it involved the future leadership structure of the company. For once, I allowed myself to hope that my contributions would be recognized alongside his. The night of the gala, I spent hours getting ready, selecting a conservative but elegant midnight blue gown. I decided to bring Marcus, my boyfriend of 8 months, as my +1. Dad had never warmed to him, calling him too bohemian for our family circle, despite Marcus's successful career as a surgeon. He did not come from the right family, Dad would mutter, whatever that meant. But I was 28 years old and tired of attending family functions alone to appease my father's inexplicable preferences. As Marcus and I prepared to leave my downtown condo for the gala, I caught myself in the mirror, the perfect vision of a Mitchell, poised, successful, and utterly unaware that in a few hours, that identity would be shattered forever. The Mitchell Enterprises 40th Anniversary Gala transformed the Seattle Art Museum into a temple of wealth and influence. Ice sculptures shaped like our company logo greeted guests in the grand foyer. Champagne flowed from fountain displays while servers offered delicacies from around the world. A string quartet played subtly in the corner, though few people noticed the music over the hum of power brokers making deals between toasts. "Breathtaking," Marcus whispered as we entered. His hand rested reassuringly on the small of my back. Though he had attended medical school with classmates from wealthy families, the sheer ostentation of Mitchell gatherings still surprised him. "Dad spared no expense," I replied, scanning the room for my family. 40 years is a significant milestone. We found my brother James holding court with a group of investors. His wife Victoria stood dutifully by his side, her baby bump barely visible under her designer maternity gown. James was announcing his first child, the next generation of Mitchells, to anyone who would listen. "Cassandra," he nodded when he spotted me, "and Dr. Marcus. Surprised Dad approved your +1. The subtle dig was classic James. "I did not ask for permission," I replied coolly. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "Making the rounds. Big announcements tonight." James smirked with the satisfaction of someone who already knew secrets others did not. "Dad has been meeting with the lawyers all week finalizing details." I excused myself and led Marcus toward the bar, where we ran into Amanda. My younger sister was radiant in a daring red gown, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo that belied her usual chaotic style. "Cass!" She embraced me with genuine warmth. Amanda, for all her flaws, was the only Mitchell who showed real affection. And handsome doctor man. "Still slumming it with my boring sister?" Marcus laughed. "Your boring sister designed that award-winning sustainable office complex downtown that everyone is talking about." Amanda rolled her eyes. "God, you two are perfect for each other. All accomplishments and responsibility." She lowered her voice. "Fair warning, Dad has been in a mood all day. Something about old ghosts and buried secrets. Mom keeps crying in the bathroom when she thinks no one is looking." "What are you talking about?" I asked, suddenly concerned. "No idea. You know how they get around the anniversary season. But worse this year." She gestured vaguely with her champagne flute. "Oh shit, incoming. Parental units at 2 o'clock. My parents approached, my father resplendent in a custom tuxedo, my mother ethereal in silver. They were the picture of success, though I immediately noticed the tension in my mother's smile and the tightness around my father's eyes. "Cassandra," Dad acknowledged me stiffly. I see you brought Dr. Calloway despite my recommendation. Marcus is my partner, Dad. I wanted him here for the celebration. As you wish. His gaze slid past me. Eleanor, we need to greet the governor. They moved on without further comment. Marcus squeezed my hand. That was warm. Does he practice his disapproval in the mirror? Probably. It is a Mitchell specialty. I attempted humor, but my father's coldness had already dimmed my spirits. The evening progressed with the predictable rhythm of wealth. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and accomplishments were applauded. I watched my father command the room during his keynote address, celebrating 40 years of Mitchell innovation while hinting at exciting changes to come. Family is everything, he proclaimed to the assembled guests. Mitchell Enterprises was built on the foundation of legacy and loyalty. Tonight, we look to the future of that legacy. As dessert was served, I excused myself to find the restroom. Taking a shortcut through a side gallery, I heard raised voices coming from a small administrative office. I recognized them immediately as my parents. She deserves to know the truth, Richard. My mother's voice was uncharacteristically strained. 40 years of lies. I cannot do this anymore. Never! My father's voice was a harsh whisper. It would destroy everything we have built. But the legal documents, my mother insisted. The transfer of ownership. We cannot exclude her based on blood when she... Enough, Eleanor. Something heavy hit the wall. No one can ever know. No one. I stood frozen outside the door, my heart racing. What were they talking about? What legal documents? What truth was my mother referring to? The door suddenly swung open, and I found myself face to face with my parents. My father's expression shifted from shock to fury in an instant. How long have you been standing there? He demanded. Were you spying on us? I was looking for the restroom, I stammered. I heard arguing. Is everything okay? My mother's face had gone pale. Richard, please, let me explain to her. Explain what? I asked, finding my courage. What is this truth I deserve to know? What legal documents are you talking about? For a moment, the three of us stood in tense silence. Then my father's expression hardened into something I had never seen before, pure, undiluted hatred. You really want to know? He stepped toward me. Fine. You are not entitled to anything. Not my name, not my company, not 1 cent of my fortune. Richard, no! My mother grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. What are you talking about? I felt dizzy, unmoored. Dad, what is going on? Do not call me that, he spat. I have tolerated this charade long enough. The commotion had drawn attention. Amanda appeared in the hallway, followed by James and several guests. My father seemed beyond caring about the audience. 40 years I have protected this family's legacy, he continued, his voice rising. 40 years of building something for my true children. And you dare to demand equal treatment? I have not demanded anything, I protested, humiliation burning through me as onlookers gathered. I have only ever tried to make you proud. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. My father reached inside his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a folded document. I recognized it as the inheritance papers his lawyers had prepared for all 3 children, outlining our stakes in the company after his eventual retirement. You want to know the truth? Here is the truth. He thrust the papers toward me, then suddenly pulled back. With deliberate malice, he began tearing them to pieces. You get nothing. You are no daughter of mine. Then his hand struck my face with such force that I stumbled backward against the wall. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent hallway. Guests gasped. Someone dropped a champagne flute. My mother began to sob. Richard! Marcus stepped forward, but security personnel appeared as if from nowhere, summoned by James's discreet signal. Remove them both from the premises, my father instructed coldly. Cassandra Mitchell is hereby banned from all Mitchell properties and enterprises, effective immediately. As security escorted us toward the exit, I looked back to see my siblings' reactions. Amanda stood shocked, tears streaming down her face. James merely adjusted his cufflinks, avoiding eye contact. My mother called out once, "Cassandra, I am so sorry." Then the grand doors of the Seattle Art Museum closed behind us, and just like that, I was exiled from the only family I had ever known. The morning after the gala, I woke to the incessant buzzing of my phone. Not calls from my family checking on me, as I briefly, foolishly hoped, but news alerts. The Seattle business community was ablaze with speculation about my dramatic exit from the Mitchell Gala. Headlines ranged from tasteless, Mitchell heiress slapped with disinheritance, to cruel, family feud, Cassandra Mitchell's secret shame exposed. None of the articles contained actual facts, just wild conjecture about what I might have done to deserve such public rejection. The prevailing theories involved embezzlement, addiction, or an inappropriate relationship with a company executive. My carefully cultivated professional reputation was disintegrating in real time. Marcus brought me coffee in bed, his expression grave as he scrolled through the news on his tablet. "Have you heard from any of them?" he asked. I checked my phone again. Nothing from Mom or Dad. Amanda sent a text at 3 a.m. that just says, "What the actual fuck happened? James sent this." I showed him the message from my brother. "You should have just kept your mouth shut." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean? What exactly did you overhear?" "Something about legal documents and blood relation. Mom wanted to tell me some truth. Dad refused." I pressed my palms against my temples, fighting a splitting headache. None of it makes sense. Why would he say I am not his daughter? Maybe it was just a cruel figure of speech? Marcus suggested, but his medical training had taught him to look for patterns, and he seemed unconvinced by his own theory. "Have you tried calling your mother directly?" I had tried, repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts that showed as delivered but remained unread. The family wall of silence was absolute and crushing. At 9 a.m., my work email pinged with a message from Mitchell Enterprises' HR department. "Due to recent developments, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Please do not attempt to access company premises or systems. Your personal effects will be shipped to your last known address. A settlement agreement waiving all claims against the company is attached for your signature in exchange for 3 months severance." By 10 a.m., my company credit cards had been canceled. By noon, the keycard to my office building no longer worked. By 2 p.m., the lease office of my luxury condo building, owned by a Mitchell Enterprises subsidiary, called to inform me that my preferential leasing arrangement had been revoked, and I would need to vacate within 30 days or begin paying market rate, which was triple what I had been paying. "They cannot just erase me," I told Marcus that evening, pacing my soon-to-be former living room. "I worked for everything I achieved at that company. My designs won awards. I brought in millions in contracts." "I know." Marcus sat on the couch, watching me with growing concern. "But wealthy families like yours operate by different rules. They can make life very difficult when they want to." "Like mine," I repeated hollowly. "Except apparently they are not my family, according to my father." The following day brought a certified letter from Maxwell Thornton, my father's longtime attorney. The contents were brutally succinct. I had been removed from Richard Mitchell's will and all associated trusts. Any Mitchell family heirlooms in my possession were to be returned immediately. I was no longer authorized to use the Mitchell name for business or social advancement. I called the lawyer's office, demanding an explanation. His assistant informed me Mr. Thornton would not be speaking with me under any circumstances. My father's instructions were explicit. "This is insane," I told her. "I am his daughter. There must be some misunderstanding." "Miss Mitchell," she replied coldly, "I am not at liberty to discuss family matters, but I would suggest you respect Mr. Mitchell's wishes and move on with your life." Move on to what? My entire identity had been built around being a Mitchell. My career had flourished within the safe harbor of the family company. My social circle consisted mainly of people connected to my parents' world. As the days passed, I watched that world recede from me like a tide pulling away from shore. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. Dinner invitations dried up. My professional contacts suddenly became unavailable for meetings. Seattle's elite closed ranks around the Mitchells, and I found myself on the wrong side of that barrier. A week after the gala, I received a text from Amanda. "It is not what you think. This goes way back. Meet me?" Hope fluttered in my chest. I immediately suggested a quiet cafe far from our usual haunts. She arrived wearing large sunglasses and a baseball cap, glancing nervously around the nearly empty coffee shop. "I cannot stay long," she said, sliding into the booth. "Dad would literally kill me if he knew I was here." "Amanda, please, tell me what is going on. Why did he do this? What did I do wrong? My sister bit her lip, conflict evident on her face. I do not know the whole story. No one does except Mom and Dad, but it has to do with before. Before what? Before you came to us. She lowered her voice. I was only 3 when you joined our family. I do not remember a time without you, but James does. He was 8. What are you talking about? I did not join the family. I was born into it. A cold sensation spread through my chest. That is just it, Cass. I do not think you were. Amanda reached for my hand. There are no baby pictures of you before you were about 3 years old. James remembers Dad bringing you home and telling him you were his new sister. Mom was in a psychiatric hospital for months before that. Something about losing a baby. The cafe seemed to tilt around me. That is impossible. I would know if I was adopted. I do not think it was adoption, Amanda whispered, looking even more uncomfortable. I overheard Mom and Dad fighting once when I was a teenager. Mom said something about how they would go to prison if anyone found out how they got you. My stomach lurched. What are you saying? I do not know exactly. But with the company anniversary and Dad planning to transfer ownership shares, the lawyers started asking questions about bloodlines and legal heirs. That is when everything blew up. Amanda checked her watch and stood abruptly. I have to go. James is tracking my phone for Dad. Just be careful, Cass, and maybe look into your early childhood. There might be records somewhere. She hugged me quickly and was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers and a growing sense of dread. Marcus tried to be supportive, but as the weeks passed and my financial situation grew more precarious, I sensed him pulling away. The glamorous architect with family connections had transformed overnight into an unemployed woman with powerful enemies. Our relationship had always been easiest during the good times. Maybe we should take a break, he suggested one evening, not quite meeting my eyes. Give you space to sort through your family issues. I laughed bitterly. Just admit it, Marcus. Dating a Mitchell was appealing. Dating a disgraced ex-Mitchell is not. He did not deny it, which told me everything. By the 1-month mark after the gala incident, I had moved out of my luxury condo and into a modest studio apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood. I had applied to 17 architectural firms, receiving 16 rejections, and 1 insulting offer at an entry-level salary despite my director-level experience. I had sold my designer wardrobe to pay rent. I had lost my boyfriend, my social standing, and most painful of all, my family. Each night, I lay awake replaying Amanda's words. Could I actually have been adopted? But why the secrecy? Why the extreme reaction from my father? And what did Amanda mean about prison? I tried researching my early childhood, but the Mitchells had been careful. My birth certificate looked legitimate, listing Richard and Eleanor Mitchell as my biological parents. My early medical records showed normal pediatric visits, yet there were gaps and inconsistencies when I looked closer. Eye surgery at age 3 with no prior indication of vision problems. The complete absence of records before age 2.5. The strange notation transition of care on my first documented physical exam. I was living in limbo, cut off from my past and uncertain of my future. Then one evening, my intercom buzzed, announcing visitors I had not been expecting. 3 attorneys who would finally begin to unravel the mystery of who Cassandra Mitchell really was, or rather, who she never had been at all. I know some of you have experienced shocking family revelations, though perhaps not quite this extreme. If you are following this story, let me know in the comments if you have ever discovered unexpected truths about your family history. Your engagement helps others find these stories of family secrets and their aftermath. The knock on my apartment door came at precisely 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month and 8 days after the gala that had destroyed my life. I peered through the peephole to see 3 well-dressed strangers standing in the dimly lit hallway of my new, decidedly downmarket building. "Cassandra Mitchell?" called a woman's voice. "My name is Judith Cohen. I am an attorney. My colleagues and I need to speak with you on a matter of significant importance." I should have been suspicious. In my experience, lawyers rarely brought good news, especially lately. But something in her tone, professional yet tinged with compassion, made me unlatch the chain. 3 people entered my small apartment, instantly making the space feel cramped. The woman who had spoken, Judith Cohen, appeared to be in her early 60s with silver hair in a neat bob and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. "Thank you for seeing us without an appointment," she said, taking in my modest surroundings with a carefully neutral expression. "These are my colleagues, Daniel Rosario and Sarah Kim." Daniel Rosario was a solidly built man of about 45, with salt and pepper hair and the watchful gaze of someone accustomed to noticing details. Sarah Kim, the youngest of the trio at perhaps 38, carried a sleek leather portfolio and had the sharp, attentive demeanor of someone who missed nothing. "What is this about?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit at my small dining table. "If my father sent you with more legal threats, you can save your breath. He has already taken everything." "We do not work for Richard Mitchell," Judith clarified, her expression darkening slightly at his name. "In fact, we represent interests that are very much opposed to his." "Who sent you then?" The three exchanged glances before Daniel spoke. "Miss Mitchell, I used to work for the FBI in their forensic investigation unit before becoming an attorney. I specialized in missing persons cases, particularly those involving children." A chill ran through me. I do not understand what that has to do with me. Sarah opened her portfolio and carefully withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping protected in a plastic sleeve. She slid it across the table. The Chicago Tribune headline from 28 years ago read, "Infant abducted from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, parents devastated." The grainy photo showed a young couple holding a press conference, the woman clutching a baby blanket, the man's arm protectively around her shoulders. The caption named them as David and Catherine Winters, pleading for the return of their 3-day-old daughter, Morgan. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Miss Mitchell," Judith said gently, "we have been investigating this cold case for many years. Recent developments have led us to believe you might be connected to it." The room seemed to tilt. "You think I am this missing baby?" "That is ridiculous. I am Cassandra Mitchell. I have a birth certificate, school records, a whole life history." "Documents can be falsified," Daniel said, "especially by someone with the resources of Richard Mitchell." "What my colleagues are trying to say," Sarah interjected, her tone softer, "is that we have reason to believe you may be Morgan Winters, kidnapped from Northwestern Memorial Hospital on April 22nd, 28 years ago. April 22nd, the date my parents took their strange annual business trip. The date that always left my mother red-eyed and my father in a dark mood. "This is insane," I whispered, but doubt had already taken root. "We understand this is shocking," Judith said. "We would not be here if we did not have substantial evidence suggesting a connection." "What evidence?" I demanded. Daniel pulled out a small notebook. Richard Mitchell's company, then a startup called Mitchell Software Solutions, relocated from Chicago to Seattle immediately after the kidnapping. Eleanor Mitchell, who had been visibly pregnant in company photos, suddenly had a 3-month-old daughter when they re-established in Seattle. There are no birth records for Cassandra Mitchell in any Chicago hospital. The first official documentation of your existence is a Seattle pediatrician's record when you were approximately 3 months old. "Coincidences?" I said weakly. "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, "but combined with your father's recent behavior, particularly after company lawyers began investigating bloodlines for ownership transfer documents, it creates a troubling pattern." My mind raced back to the conversation I had overheard. Legal documents, blood relations, my mother saying I deserved to know the truth. "The Winters never stopped looking for their daughter," Judith continued. "They dedicated their lives to finding Morgan. They established a foundation for missing children. They keep her room ready, even now." My throat tightened. Why come to me now after all this time? "Your very public falling out with the Mitchells," Daniel explained. "It created an opportunity to approach you directly. We have been building this case for years, but the Mitchells' wealth and influence made investigation difficult." "What do you want from me?" I asked. Judith leaned forward. "A DNA test. If you are not Morgan Winters, you will have eliminated a possibility and can move forward with your life. If you are," she left the sentence unfinished. I thought about my shattered relationship with the family I had always believed was mine, the inconsistencies in my early childhood records, my father's inexplicable rage and declaration that I was not his daughter. "And if I refuse?" "That is your right," Sarah said. But ask yourself why Richard Mitchell would so suddenly and violently cut you out of his life. Ask yourself why there are no photographs of you as a newborn. Ask yourself why your parents took an annual trip on the exact date Morgan Winters was kidnapped. My hands trembled as I reached for the newspaper clipping, studying the faces of the young couple who had lost their baby daughter. Something about the woman's eyes, the shape of the man's jaw, tugged at me in ways I could not articulate. If I do this, I said slowly, what happens next? If the test is negative, we apologize for the intrusion and leave you in peace, Judith assured me. If it is positive, we help you reconnect with your biological family, if you wish. We also help you pursue legal action against the Mitchells. You want me to send my parents, or the people I thought were my parents, to prison for kidnapping me? The concept was too enormous to fully grasp. That would be your decision, Daniel said. But yes, kidnapping is a federal crime with no statute of limitations. I need time to think, I said. Judith nodded understandingly. Of course. This is overwhelming news. She placed a business card on the table. We will leave you with this information. Inside this envelope is a sealed file with more details about the Winters family and the kidnapping case. I suggest you open it only when you feel ready. Sarah added, the DNA test is simple. A cheek swab that you can do yourself with the kit we have brought. The results would be compared against samples the Winters provided years ago. As they prepared to leave, Judith paused at the door. Miss Mitchell, whatever you decide, whatever the outcome, remember that your identity is not solely determined by your biological origins or the family that raised you. You have built your own life and accomplishments. After they left, I sat motionless at my table, staring at the business card, the newspaper clipping, and the sealed envelope. The DNA test kit remained in its package, simultaneously representing both terrifying uncertainty and the possibility of answers. Could it be true? Was my entire identity a fabrication? Were Richard and Eleanor Mitchell kidnappers who had stolen me from my real parents? The thought was so monstrous, so life-altering that my mind rebelled against it. Yet as I reviewed the strange inconsistencies of my childhood, the missing photos, the gaps in records, my father's inexplicable rejection, a horrible new reality began to take shape. The perfect Mitchell family had always been built on carefully constructed appearances. What if the most carefully constructed appearance of all had been me? I reached for my phone, then set it down again. Who could I possibly call? The people I had always believed were my family had cut me off completely. Marcus was gone. My former colleagues wanted nothing to do with me. I was utterly alone with a decision that would permanently alter the course of my life. With trembling fingers, I finally opened the DNA kit. The instructions were simple. Swab the inside of my cheek, seal the sample, mail it in the prepaid envelope. Such a small action with such enormous consequences. Who am I? I whispered to my empty apartment as I completed the test. Who have I always been? I mailed the DNA sample the next morning. Then I returned to my apartment, sat on my bed, and finally opened the sealed file the lawyers had left. It was time to learn about the Winters family, and the baby girl named Morgan who had vanished without a trace 28 years earlier, only to potentially reappear as a woman named Cassandra Mitchell. The weight of this revelation is almost too much to bear alone. If you are still with me in this journey, I would be grateful to hear if any of you have discovered life-changing family secrets. How did you process the emotional aftermath? Sometimes knowing others have navigated similar waters helps us find our own path forward. Now, let me continue with what happened next. While waiting for the DNA test results, I found myself unable to simply sit idle with my thoughts spiraling into darker theories each day. I needed to conduct my own investigation, if only to prepare myself for whatever truth the test might reveal. I began with the file the attorneys had provided. The Winters family history unfolded before me like a novel about strangers, yet with unsettling moments of familiarity. David Winters had been a structural engineer for a Chicago architectural firm, his wife, Catherine, a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. They had met in college, married after graduation, and spent 3 years renovating an old Victorian home in Evanston before deciding to start their family. Catherine had suffered 2 miscarriages before successfully carrying baby Morgan to term. The file contained a copy of the original birth announcement. Morgan Elise Winters, born April 19, 7 pounds 3 ounces, 20 inches long. There was a hospital photo of the newborn with a tuft of dark hair and eyes squinted against the camera flash. The kidnapping occurred 3 days later. Catherine had been resting while Morgan was in the hospital nursery during routine newborn testing. A hospital staff member noticed the baby missing during shift change. Security footage showed a woman in nursing scrubs carrying a baby out a side entrance, but the grainy video from 1997 technology failed to capture clear facial features. The investigation had initially focused on hospital employees, but expanded when no solid leads emerged. The case gained national attention, with the Winters appearing on morning shows and true crime programs, pleading for their daughter's return. They never gave up hope. Pushing the file aside, I turned to my laptop. The Chicago Public Library's digital archives held a treasure trove of news articles about the kidnapping. I found myself staring at photos of David and Catherine Winters in their younger days, searching for resemblances. David had the same slight asymmetry to his smile that I saw in my own mirror. Catherine's eyes were the exact unusual shade of hazel as mine, with the same distinctive gold flecks. I had always assumed I inherited my eyes from a Mitchell ancestor, but no one else in the family had this eye color. Next, I searched for information about Mitchell Enterprises' early history. Sure enough, news archives confirmed that Richard Mitchell's fledgling software company had abruptly relocated from Chicago to Seattle in May 1997, just weeks after baby Morgan's disappearance. The press release cited expansion opportunities in the growing Pacific Northwest tech corridor. There was a photo of Richard and Eleanor in front of their new Seattle headquarters, Eleanor holding a baby partially wrapped in a blanket. That night, I could not sleep. I kept returning to a memory from childhood that suddenly seemed significant. When I was about 7, I had asked my mother why my eyes were different from everyone else in the family. "You had surgery when you were little," she had explained too quickly, "for a condition called heterochromia. Your eyes used to be different colors from each other. The doctors fixed it." I had accepted this explanation without question. Now, I wondered if it had been a lie to explain why my eyes did not match my supposed genetic heritage. I found myself digging through old medical files I had brought from my condo. There it was, corrective eye procedure at age 3, with no prior diagnosis of heterochromia or any eye condition. The next morning, I ventured to the Seattle Central Library to access their historical newspaper archives. A helpful librarian assisted me in finding coverage of Mitchell Enterprises' 10th anniversary celebration in 1994, 3 years before my supposed birth. I gasped when I found the photo spread. There was Richard Mitchell, accepting a local business award, with Eleanor beside him, clearly several months pregnant. The caption read, "Mitchell and wife Eleanor, expecting their second child, celebrate a decade of tech innovation." Their son James stood nearby, looking bored in a child's suit. If Eleanor had been pregnant in 1994, who was that baby? And how could I have been born to her in 1997 when the evidence suggested they had already had a second child? I printed the article and added it to my growing file of discrepancies. Then, on impulse, I searched for Mitchell family tragedy and filtered for the years 1995 to 1997. A small obituary from January 1997 appeared. The Mitchell family mourns the passing of infant daughter Elizabeth Ann, age 3 months, private service held. In lieu of flowers, donations to SIDS research. My blood ran cold. Elizabeth Ann Mitchell had died of sudden infant death syndrome in January 1997, just 3 months before Morgan Winters was kidnapped in April. Had my parents, devastated by the loss of their baby daughter, stolen another couple's child to replace her? The theory was too horrific to contemplate, yet it explained so much. The missing baby photos, the mysterious annual trips on April 22nd, my mother's emotional distance, my father's explosive reaction when the company lawyers began investigating bloodlines for the ownership transfer. I needed one more piece of confirmation before the DNA results arrived. I called Amanda, routing my call through a disposable phone number in case James was still tracking her communications for my father. "Cass, where are you?" she answered immediately. "Are you okay?" "I have been worried sick." "I am fine," I assured her, though nothing could have been further from the truth. "Amanda, I need to ask you something important." Do you remember ever hearing about a baby named Elizabeth? The lengthy silence told me everything before she even spoke. How did you find out about her? She finally whispered. So it is true? There was a baby girl who died before I came along? Amanda's voice was barely audible. I was not supposed to know. I found a small photo album in Mom's closet when I was about 12. A baby girl with Mitchell family Christmas embroidered on her stocking. When I asked Mom who she was, she had a complete breakdown. Dad told me later that they had a daughter who died of SIDS. Elizabeth. He said it would kill Mom if I ever mentioned her name again, so I never did. And I came into the family shortly after that? I guess so. I was too young to really understand the timeline. Amanda paused. Cass, what is going on? What have you found out? I could not bring myself to share my suspicions. Not yet. I am just trying to understand why Dad would suddenly reject me. It does not make sense. He has been different lately, Amanda admitted. Since the lawyers started preparing the anniversary ownership transfers, something about heir verification and bloodline documentation. Dad went ballistic when they requested DNA samples for legal certainty. After ending the call with a promise to stay in touch, I sat back, my suspicions hardening into near certainty. I needed just one final confirmation. The DNA test results arrived by secure email exactly 2 weeks after I had submitted the sample. I stared at the unopened message in my inbox, knowing that clicking it would forever divide my life into before and after. Finally, gathering all my courage, I opened it. Test subject, Cassandra Mitchell. Comparison samples. David Winters, Catherine Winters. Probability of biological relationship. 99.9997%. Conclusion. Test subject is the biological daughter of David and Catherine Winters. The room seemed to spin around me. Despite all the evidence I had uncovered, some part of me had clung to the hope that this was an elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. That hope was now extinguished by the clinical certainty of genetic science. I was not Cassandra Mitchell. I had never been Cassandra Mitchell. I was Morgan Winters, stolen from my real parents in a Chicago hospital 28 years earlier. My entire identity had been built on an unthinkable crime. Every memory, every achievement, every relationship had unfolded in a life that was never meant to be mine. The people I had called Mom and Dad were kidnappers, who had torn me from my biological family and raised me as their replacement child. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed Judith Cohen's number. I got the results, I said when she answered. They are positive. I want to meet my real parents. Are you sure you are ready? Judith asked gently. This is an overwhelming revelation. I have been living a lie my entire life, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I need to know the truth of who I really am, all of it. As I hung up, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The face looking back at me belonged to Morgan Winters, daughter of David and Catherine, who had been searching for me for 28 years. It was time for Morgan to finally come home. The meeting with Eleanor Mitchell was arranged at her downtown office for the charitable foundation she chaired. I chose a public location intentionally, somewhere neutral yet private enough for the conversation we needed to have. Judith Cohen accompanied me, both for legal support and as a witness to whatever revelations might emerge. Eleanor looked as if she had aged a decade in the 2 months since I had last seen her. Her customary perfect appearance had slipped, her designer outfit hanging loosely on her frame, dark circles prominent, despite attempts to conceal them with makeup. When she saw me, her composure cracked immediately. "Cassandra," she whispered, half rising from her chair before sinking back down. "You look well." "My name is Morgan," I said, the words feeling strange yet somehow right on my tongue. "Morgan Winters. But you already knew that, did not you?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "I need to hear you say it," I insisted, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain calm. "I need to hear the truth from you directly." "Please understand," she began, her voice breaking. "We never meant for it to happen this way." "What way? The kidnapping? The decades of lies? Which part was not meant to happen?" My control was slipping, the anger I had suppressed now rising to the surface. Eleanor flinched at my tone. "All of it. None of it." We were not thinking clearly. Grief does terrible things to people. Tell me everything, I demanded. From the beginning. Eleanor drew a shaky breath. We had a daughter, Elizabeth. She was beautiful, perfect, 3 months old. One morning I went to her crib, and she was not breathing. Her voice broke completely. SIDS. There was nothing anyone could have done, but Richard could not accept it. He had just secured major investors for the company. We were finally becoming successful. Everything was supposed to be perfect. So you stole someone else's baby to replace her? The bluntness of my question made Eleanor wince. Richard fell apart after Elizabeth died, completely unraveled. He would sit in her nursery for hours, holding her clothes, refusing to believe she was gone. The doctors prescribed medication, but he would not take it. He became obsessed with the idea that there had been a mistake, that somewhere our baby was still alive. That does not explain kidnapping me, I said coldly. Richard had a business trip to Chicago 3 months after we lost Elizabeth. He called me one night, sounding more like himself than he had since her death. He said he had found her, our baby girl, in a hospital nursery. He was convinced you were Elizabeth somehow, that there had been a cosmic mistake that needed correcting. My stomach turned. He saw a convenient baby and decided to take her? I tried to reason with him, Eleanor insisted, tears now flowing freely. I told him it was impossible, that he needed help, but he became fixated. He said if I truly loved him, if I wanted our family to heal, I would help him bring our daughter home. And you agreed? Judith asked, speaking for the first time. You willingly participated in a kidnapping? Eleanor's shoulders slumped. I was afraid he would hurt himself if I refused. I was grieving too, not thinking clearly. By the time I realized the magnitude of what we had done, it was too late. We had relocated to Seattle, established new lives. You were Cassandra Mitchell, our daughter. There was no going back. The weight of her confession hung in the air between us. How did you do it? I asked. Logistically, how did you steal a baby from a hospital? Richard planned everything. He had a tech conference in Chicago that week. He observed hospital routines for days, acquired scrubs, and an ID badge. He took you during shift change when the nursery was momentarily understaffed. Eleanor's voice had gone flat, as if reciting events that had happened to someone else. I met him at a private airfield. We flew back to Seattle on a chartered plane. Richard had already arranged new birth documentation through contacts he had made in software security systems. In 1997, digital records were still new, relatively easy to manipulate if you knew how. And no one ever suspected? Judith asked. We moved across the country, changed our social circle completely. Richard's company took off, giving us resources to insulate ourselves from questions. When concerned relatives noticed we suddenly had a 3-month-old, we said we had adopted privately after losing Elizabeth, that it was too painful to discuss. I thought of all the holidays, birthdays, and family milestones that the Winters had missed while I grew up as someone else's daughter. Do you have any idea what you stole from my real parents? Eleanor flinched at the phrase, real parents, but did not challenge it. I told Richard we should come forward, especially after I saw the news coverage of your parents begging for your return. But he threatened me, said he would take you and James and disappear if I ever breathed a word. So you chose your marriage over doing the right thing, I observed bitterly. I chose what I thought would protect you, Eleanor countered. By then, you were settling in with us. You were calling me Mama. I convinced myself it was better for you to have a stable home than to go through another traumatic separation. That was not your decision to make. I stood up, unable to contain my emotions any longer. You stole me from people who loved me, who never stopped looking for me. I know, Eleanor whispered. There is nothing I can say to justify what we did. Nothing that makes it right. Why now? Judith asked. Why did Richard suddenly turn on Cassandra, on Morgan, after all these years? Eleanor's expression shifted to something harder. The company's 40th anniversary was approaching. Richard wanted to transfer significant ownership shares to James, but the board insisted on succession documentation. Corporate bylaws stipulated blood relation for certain inheritance provisions. And I am not a blood relative. I finished for her. The lawyers suggested DNA verification for all 3 children. Richard panicked. He had maintained the fiction for so long, convinced himself that you were truly our daughter. The legal scrutiny threatened everything. So he cut me out completely rather than risk the truth coming out. I said flatly. Eleanor nodded. He thought if he publicly disowned you first, any claims you might make later would seem like retaliation. Classic Richard, always 10 steps ahead. And you? Why did you finally want me to know the truth? I asked. Eleanor's face crumpled. Because you deserve to know who you are, because I have lived with this guilt for 28 years. Because I started a Missing Children's Foundation 5 years ago, hoping somehow it would balance the scales for what we did to your real family. She laughed bitterly, as if anything could. Are you willing to make a formal statement? Judith asked. For the record and potentially for criminal proceedings? Yes, Eleanor said without hesitation. I will testify to everything. Richard will fight it, of course. He has resources, connections, but I have documentation that might help your case. What documentation? I asked, surprised. I kept a diary starting the day after we took you. I thought someday I might need to explain to you what happened, why we did what we did. It has dates, details, names of people who helped arrange the false documentation. You knowingly preserved evidence of your own crime? Judith sounded incredulous. I preserved the truth, Eleanor corrected. I always knew this day might come. Part of me hoped it would. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. I am not asking for forgiveness, Morgan. What we did was unforgivable. But please know that despite everything, I did love you as my daughter. I stood up, unable to bear any more. I need time to process all this. Judith has my contact information if you think of anything else relevant to the case. As I reached the door, Eleanor called after me. There is one more thing you should know, about James and Amanda. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. They do not know the truth. James was only 5 when we lost Elizabeth, too young to fully understand. Amanda was born 2 years after we brought you home. They are innocent in all this. I nodded once, acknowledging her words without commitment, then left the office. Outside on the street, the Seattle rain seemed appropriate for the storm of emotions raging inside me. My entire life had been built on an unimaginable crime. The mother I had known was a kidnapper. The father I had tried so desperately to please had stolen me from my real parents. And somewhere in Chicago, those parents had been waiting 28 years for their daughter to come home. The law offices of Cohen, Rosario, and Kim occupied a modest suite in a professional building near the Seattle courthouse. Judith had suggested it as neutral territory for my first meeting with my biological parents, a controlled environment where everyone's emotions could be managed with professional support. I arrived an hour early, too nervous to sit in my apartment waiting. Daniel Rosario met me in the reception area, his normally stoic expression softened with understanding. They are just as nervous as you are, he assured me, leading me to a private conference room. They have been waiting for this moment for 28 years, but now that it is here, they are worried about overwhelming you. What did you tell them about me? I asked, fidgeting with the sleeve of my blouse. I had changed outfits 3 times that morning, unsure how to dress for meeting the parents I never knew I had. Just the basics, Daniel replied. Your name, your education and career, that you were raised as Cassandra Mitchell but have confirmed through DNA testing that you are their biological daughter, Morgan. We wanted to leave the personal details for you to share as you feel comfortable. The conference room was arranged with comfortable chairs rather than around a formal table. A box of tissues sat discreetly on a side table. Sarah Kim was already there, arranging a tray of water and coffee. They have arrived, she said softly. They are in the reception area whenever you are ready. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. After 28 years, mere feet and seconds separated me from my birth parents. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I am ready, I said, though I had never felt less ready for anything in my life. Judith entered first, followed by a couple who stopped just inside the doorway, clearly as overwhelmed as I was by the moment. David Winters was a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and the same slightly asymmetrical smile I saw in my mirror. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khaki pants, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. Catherine Winters was shorter, with warm hazel eyes identical to mine, her hair a rich brown cut in a practical bob. She clutched her husband's arm as if for support, her other hand pressed against her mouth as she looked at me. For a long moment no one spoke. I stood frozen, staring at the genetic blueprints from which I had been created, my eyes, my smile, my cheekbones. After a lifetime of looking nothing like the Mitchells, the resemblance was startling. Catherine was the first to break the silence, a small sob escaping as she took a tentative step forward. "Morgan?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Is it really you?" I nodded, unable to form words past the lump in my throat. She moved toward me slowly, as if afraid I might vanish if she approached too quickly. When she reached me, her hand hovered near my face, not quite touching. "May I?" she asked. I nodded again. Her fingers gently brushed my cheek, warm and trembling. "You have my eyes," she said wonderingly. "I used to tell people that was how they would recognize you if they ever saw you, by your unusual hazel eyes with the gold flecks." David approached more cautiously, his expression a complex mixture of joy and disbelief. "We never stopped looking for you," he said, his voice breaking. "Not for a single day." Something inside me broke open at his words. Without conscious thought, I stepped forward into their embrace. Catherine's arms wrapped around me immediately, David's encircling us both. They smelled unfamiliar yet somehow right, a genetic memory I had not known existed. "I am sorry," I found myself saying. "I am sorry it took so long to find you." "No, no," Catherine pulled back to look at me, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You were an innocent baby. We are just so grateful to have found you at last." We moved to the seating area, the attorneys discreetly withdrawing to give us privacy while remaining nearby if needed. For the next hour, we began the strange, halting process of getting to know each other across a 28-year void. I learned that David had left engineering after my kidnapping, unable to focus on structural calculations while his world had fallen apart. He had become a high school math and physics teacher instead, finding purpose in helping young people. Catherine had continued as a pediatric nurse, saying the connection to children had kept her hope alive that someday she would find her own child again. They had never had more children, though not for medical reasons. "We were afraid," David explained, "afraid to love that deeply again and risk another loss." But they had created a large extended family through their community work and missing children's advocacy. I saw photos of their modest but welcoming home in Evanston, the same Victorian they had been renovating when Catherine was pregnant with me. They had completed it despite their grief, refusing to let my absence stop their lives completely. Then Catherine showed me something that broke my heart anew, photos of my room. They had prepared a nursery before my birth, of course, but they had updated it over the years, transforming it from a baby's room to a little girl's space, then a teenager's retreat, and finally a young woman's sanctuary. They had marked every milestone I had passed without them. "We celebrated your birthday every year," David said, showing me photos of cakes with increasing numbers of candles. "We would wonder what you might want that year, what you might be interested in, and we would donate gifts in your name to children in need." "The basement room," Catherine added hesitantly. "We prepared it as an apartment for when you went to college or wanted independence but might still want to be close to home." We kept hoping. Their hope humbled me. While I had been growing up as Cassandra Mitchell, enjoying material privilege but emotional scarcity, these people had been loving the ghost of who I should have been, marking empty milestones with unflagging devotion. "Tell us about you," David urged. "Whatever you feel comfortable sharing. We have missed so much." So I told them about growing up in Seattle, my education, my architecture career. I spoke carefully, editing out the worst of the emotional neglect from the Mitchells, not wanting to burden our first meeting with too much darkness. There would be time for the full truth later. "You became an architect," David marveled. "I was a structural engineer. The connection to buildings, to creating spaces, is in my blood," I finished, feeling the truth of it in a way I never had before. I had always wondered why I was drawn to architecture when no one else in the Mitchell family had shown any interest in design or construction. Catherine pulled out more photos. Herself pregnant with me, my newborn hospital picture, the 3 days we had spent as a family before I was taken. Then she showed me pictures of my biological extended family. "You have 2 cousins about your age," she explained. "My sister's children, and an aunt and uncle on David's side. Grandparents who have passed now, but who never stopped looking for you. Everyone has been told about the DNA match. They are all eager to meet you, but only when you are ready." The reality of this extended biological family, all connected to me by blood and shared genetic traits, overwhelmed me. After growing up feeling like an outsider in the Mitchell family, here was an entire network of people who were literally part of me. "There is something else," David said, exchanging a glance with Catherine. "Something we want you to know." Catherine reached into her bag and withdrew a small, worn stuffed rabbit with one ear slightly crooked. "This was yours. You would not sleep without it those first 3 days. The hospital staff remembered it specifically because you clutched it so tightly during your exams. It was not taken with you." She held it out to me. I took it with trembling hands, this tangible connection to my first days of life. Something I had loved before I became Cassandra Mitchell. Something from when I was simply Morgan Winters. "We brought a few other things," David said. "Photos, your baby blanket, some memories we saved. But we do not want to overwhelm you." "I appreciate that," I said honestly. "This is all still so much to process." "Of course," Catherine nodded. "We have waited 28 years. We can be patient a little longer while you adjust." As our first meeting drew to a close, the weight of decisions still to be made settled over me. What would I do about the Mitchells? Would I press charges? How would I integrate these newfound parents into my life? Who was I now, Morgan or Cassandra, or some new hybrid of the two? David seemed to sense my internal conflict. "We know you have a lot to consider. We want you to know that while we have dreamed of this day for decades, we understand that for you, this is a shocking disruption of your entire identity. We will support whatever pace feels right for building a relationship. We just want to know you," Catherine added, "to be in your life in whatever way works for you." As we said our goodbyes, they each hugged me gently, careful not to presume too much intimacy too quickly. The restraint in their embrace, the consideration for my feelings despite their obvious desire to hold on and never let go again, told me more about their character than hours of conversation could have. Walking out of the law office into the Seattle afternoon, I felt both weightless and burdened. I had gained parents who had never stopped loving me, even in my absence. But I had also gained the responsibility of deciding what justice looked like in this impossible situation. Eleanor's confession provided evidence for a kidnapping case against Richard Mitchell. The Winters had been robbed of their daughter's childhood. Richard had committed a federal crime and then spent decades concealing it. The moral calculus seemed clear. Yet part of me still remembered Richard as the father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had attended my architecture school graduation, who had, in his own flawed way, raised me. Could I really send him to prison, however much he deserved it? And what about James and Amanda? Eleanor had said they knew nothing about my true origins. How would they react to learning their sister was never really their sister at all? These questions followed me home, where I carefully placed the small stuffed rabbit on my bedside table, a tangible reminder that I was Morgan Winters, kidnapped at 3 days old, finally found 28 years later. The journey to understanding who that meant I was now was just beginning. The case against Richard Mitchell moved with surprising speed once Eleanor's testimony and documentary evidence were secured. The FBI officially reopened the 1997 Morgan Winters kidnapping case, with Agent Maria Diaz leading the investigation. Interstate transportation of a kidnapped minor is a federal offense with no statute of limitations, she explained during our first meeting. With the DNA evidence, Mrs. Mitchell's testimony, and your mother's diary, we have more than enough to bring charges. My cooperation was requested but not strictly required. The evidence was compelling without my testimony, though a statement from me would strengthen the case considerably. Take your time deciding how involved you want to be, Judith advised. This will become very public once charges are filed. Your life will change significantly. I appreciated her counsel, but events soon forced my hand. Richard Mitchell, having learned of Eleanor's meetings with me and the attorneys, launched a preemptive offensive. First came the cease and desist letter, threatening litigation if I continued making false claims about being someone other than Cassandra Mitchell. Next came a proposed settlement agreement, $2 million in exchange for my silence and a commitment never to contact the Mitchell family again. When these tactics failed, Richard escalated. A private investigator began following me. My new employer received anonymous tips about mental instability in my history. Old college acquaintances were contacted and questioned about my character. He is trying to discredit you before the case becomes public, Daniel Rosario observed grimly. Classic intimidation strategy. The final straw came when Richard's attorneys filed for an emergency psychological evaluation, claiming I was suffering from delusions and false memory syndrome, potentially endangering myself and others. The transparent attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent was quickly dismissed by the court, but it crystallized my decision. I want to make a full statement to the FBI, I told the legal team. Everything I remember, everything I have discovered, I want Richard Mitchell held accountable. With my decision made, events accelerated rapidly. The FBI, armed with my statement and Eleanor's evidence, obtained search warrants for Mitchell properties and business records. Digital forensics experts began examining decades of financial transactions and correspondence related to the time of my kidnapping. Richard, meanwhile, had retreated to the Mitchell estate, refusing to comment publicly on the investigation. His legal team issued bland statements about baseless allegations and full cooperation with authorities. Eleanor had moved out of the family home, taking residence in a downtown condo. Her cooperation with investigators had effectively ended her marriage, though no formal divorce proceedings had begun. James Mitchell, now acting CEO of Mitchell Enterprises, called an emergency board meeting to address the crisis. Company stock had plummeted as news of the federal investigation leaked to business reporters. Whispers of kidnapping and identity fraud sent investors fleeing. In the midst of this corporate chaos, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. "We need to talk, not about the case, about us." "Meet me?" We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from both Mitchell properties and media hangouts. Amanda arrived looking exhausted, her usual designer outfit replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. "James is furious with me for contacting you," she said without preamble. "He says I am betraying the family. And what do you think?" I asked carefully. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I think my sister is sitting across from me regardless of whose DNA you share." Her words touched me more deeply than I had expected. "Even if it means your father goes to prison? If he did what they are saying, he belongs in prison." Amanda's voice was firm despite her tears. "Stealing a baby? Living that lie for decades? That is monstrous, Cass." "Morgan," I corrected gently. "My name is Morgan Winters." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I am trying to get used to that. It is hard to think of you as anyone but my big sister Cassandra." "I am still the same person," I assured her, "just with a different origin story than I thought." "What about James? Have you spoken with him?" I shook my head. "He has not reached out, and frankly, I do not think he wants to hear from me right now." Amanda's expression hardened slightly. "James has always been Dad's perfect soldier. Right now, he is in full damage control mode, trying to save the company and the Mitchell name. But he is struggling with it all. I found him crying in his office yesterday." The image of my always controlled, always perfect brother breaking down was difficult to imagine. "I am not doing this to hurt any of you," I said. "You and James are innocent in all this. But my biological parents had their child stolen from them. They deserve justice." "I know," Amanda sighed. "I just wish there was a way forward that did not tear apart what remains of both families." As Amanda and I were cautiously rebuilding our connection, the legal case continued gaining momentum. The FBI uncovered evidence that Richard had paid a hospital security guard for access to secure areas, made cash payments to a document forger known for creating false identification, and established offshore accounts shortly after the kidnapping. Eleanor's testimony provided the narrative framework connecting these individual actions into a comprehensive criminal enterprise. Her detailed diary, recording both the kidnapping itself and the subsequent cover-up, proved devastating to Richard's defense. When FBI agents arrived at the Mitchell estate with an arrest warrant, Richard attempted to flee. He had a private plane fueled and waiting at Boeing Field, a go-bag with cash and false identification documents, and ticket confirmations for destinations without extradition treaties with the United States. The arrest made national headlines. Tech mogul arrested for 1,997 kidnapping, baby snatcher to code cracker. The double life of Richard Mitchell, stolen heiress. The true identity of Cassandra Mitchell revealed. My phone exploded with messages from former colleagues, distant acquaintances, and media outlets seeking exclusive interviews. Marcus, my ex-boyfriend, suddenly reappeared with concerned texts and offers of support, his interest mysteriously rekindled now that my story had become a tabloid sensation. "Delete his number," Judith advised bluntly when I mentioned his renewed attention. "Anyone who abandoned you when you needed support but returns when you are headline news is not worth your time." She was right, of course. I blocked his number and focused on navigating the new reality of my public identity. Mitchell Enterprises stock continued its freefall as details of the case emerged. Major clients began distancing themselves from the company. The board of directors held emergency sessions to discuss leadership transitions and reputation management. James finally contacted me 2 days after Richard's arrest, his text message terse. "This is destroying the company. Thousands of jobs at risk. Is that what you want?" I did not respond. His concern for the business, rather than for the crime committed or for my feelings, made clear where his priorities lay. Perhaps in time he would come to a more balanced perspective, but for now, the gulf between us seemed unbridgeable. As Richard awaited arraignment in federal custody, denied bail as a flight risk, I met again with the Winters family. This time, we gathered at their home in Evanston, the Victorian house they had renovated while expecting me, the home where I should have grown up. Walking through the front door felt surreal, like stepping into an alternate timeline where my life had taken its intended course. Family photos lined the walls, marking holidays and milestones of the extended Winters clan. A piano stood in the living room, sheet music open on the bench. "David plays," Catherine explained, following my gaze. "He always thought you might inherit his musical talent." "I took piano lessons for years," I said quietly. It was the only extracurricular the Mitchells encouraged that did not have obvious career applications. The coincidence hung in the air between us, this thread of connection that had somehow survived despite everything. Catherine showed me to the room that had been mine in absentia all these years. The space had evolved as they imagined I would grow, currently decorated as a sophisticated guest room with personal touches that somehow seemed to match my actual tastes. Bookshelves filled with architectural volumes, a small drafting table by the window, walls painted in the exact shade of blue I had chosen for my own apartment. "We updated it every few years," David explained, standing in the doorway. "We would imagine what you might be interested in at different ages. Catherine would research current trends for girls your age. It was our way of keeping you present in our lives." The evidence of their unwavering hope overwhelmed me. While I had been growing up with the emotionally distant Mitchells, striving for approval that never quite came, these people had been loving the idea of me with a devotion that had never wavered. "I do not know what happens next," I admitted as we sat in their kitchen, Catherine preparing tea with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain normalcy in an extraordinary situation. "The case against Richard will likely go to trial unless he accepts a plea deal. The company is in turmoil. James blames me for everything." "None of that is your responsibility," David said firmly. "You are the primary victim in all this. You do not owe anyone protection from the consequences of Richard Mitchell's actions." "We just want you to know," Catherine added, setting cups of tea before us, "that whatever you decide about your future, whether that includes us a little or a lot or somewhere in between, we support you. We have already had more than we ever dared hope for, just knowing you are alive and well and meeting you as the accomplished young woman you have become." Their generosity of spirit, their willingness to accept whatever relationship I could offer without demanding the full reclamation of their daughter after all these years, touched me deeply. The contrast with Richard's controlling, transactional approach to family could not have been starker. As I drove back to my hotel that evening, I found myself considering names and identities. Who was I now? Cassandra Mitchell, the person I had been raised to be? Morgan Winters, the person I would have been without the kidnapping? Or someone new entirely, shaped by both experiences, both families, both identities? I did not have an answer yet. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt I had the freedom to discover who I truly wanted to be. The federal courthouse in Seattle fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver Richard Mitchell's sentence. After months of legal maneuvering, he had finally accepted a plea agreement rather than face a public trial where Eleanor would testify against him. The evidence had been overwhelming. DNA confirmation, Eleanor's detailed diary, financial records tracing payments to accomplices, and my own testimony about the life I had lived as someone else's stolen child. "Richard Mitchell," the judge began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom, You have pled guilty to kidnapping, transportation of a kidnapped minor across state lines, identity fraud, and obstruction of justice. These crimes are among the most serious in our federal statutes, not only because of their legal gravity but because of their profound human impact. I sat between the Winters, my biological parents, their presence steady and supportive. Across the aisle, Eleanor sat alone, James having refused to attend what he called the final destruction of our family. Amanda sat several rows back, trying to maintain some middle ground between loyalty to her father and acknowledgement of his crimes. In kidnapping Morgan Winters, the judge continued, you stole not just a child, but an entire lifetime of memories and connections. You deprived two parents of watching their daughter grow. You built your family life and business success on a foundation of criminal deception. While the court acknowledges your grief over the loss of your biological daughter, that tragedy cannot justify or mitigate the choice to inflict similar pain on another family. Richard stood impassively at the defense table, his once commanding presence diminished by the standard-issue jumpsuit and the weight of public disgrace. Taking into consideration your age and the negotiated plea agreement, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 15 years. The gavel fell with a sharp crack of finality. Richard was led away by U.S. Marshals, not once looking in my direction. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as we exited. The case had become a media sensation, with daily coverage on national news and streaming documentaries already in production. I had declined all interview requests, valuing privacy over the substantial financial offers that came with exclusive rights to my story. How does it feel to see justice served? One reporter called out. Do you consider yourself Morgan Winters or Cassandra Mitchell now? Shouted another. My legal team formed a protective barrier, guiding me to a waiting car. The questions followed me, as they had for months and would likely continue for years, questions of identity, justice, forgiveness, and how to move forward when your entire life had been built on a lie. The Mitchell fortune, once estimated at over $230 million, was now partially frozen pending legal proceedings. The judge had ordered substantial financial restitution to the Winters family for the decades of emotional suffering and lost relationship. The exact amount would be determined in civil court, but preliminary discussions suggested it would be in the tens of millions. Eleanor had voluntarily surrendered a significant portion of her personal assets as part of her immunity agreement. I cannot undo what we did, she had told me during our last meeting before sentencing, but I can try to make some small amends. Mitchell Enterprises was undergoing massive restructuring. James had stepped down as CEO after shareholders lost confidence in the Mitchell family leadership. The company would likely survive in some form, but the Mitchell name had been permanently tarnished. In the aftermath of the sentencing, I faced perhaps the most profound question of all: who was I now? After weeks of reflection, I made my decision official, filing paperwork with the King County Court. I legally changed my name to Morgan Cassandra Winters. Both my identities acknowledged, both parts of my story honored. It feels right, I explained to Catherine and David over dinner at their home, now a regular weekend destination as we carefully built our relationship. Morgan is who I was meant to be, who I am by birth. But Cassandra is 28 years of my life, my education, my career, my experiences. I cannot simply erase her. We understand, David assured me, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You are our daughter, but you are also your own person, shaped by everything you have lived through. My relationship with the Winters had evolved gradually over the months since our first meeting. We spent holidays together, shared weekly video calls, and slowly filled in the missing pieces of our respective lives. They never pressured me for more connection than I was ready to give, their patience born from decades of waiting. My biological extended family had welcomed me with open arms. Cousins, aunts, uncles, each meeting bringing new discoveries of shared traits and similarities. My mother's sister had my same laugh. My father's brother shared my inability to roll my tongue. These small biological connections, which most people take for granted, felt like precious discoveries to me. Building a relationship with my birth family did not mean cutting ties completely with the family that raised me. Amanda and I maintained regular contact, navigating our new reality as non-biological sisters who still shared a lifetime of memories. "You will always be my sister," she insisted during one of our coffee dates. "DNA does not change the fact that you helped me through my first breakup, taught me to drive, and covered for me when I snuck out to concerts." James had been slower to reconcile with the new reality. The collapse of Mitchell Enterprises had hit him hardest, his identity having been so thoroughly entwined with the company and our father's approval. But 6 months after the sentencing, he finally reached out. "I do not expect forgiveness," he said awkwardly as we sat in a quiet corner of a downtown restaurant. I reacted badly. The company was crumbling, Dad was facing prison, and I blamed you because it was easier than accepting what he had done. "You did not know," I reminded him. "You were not part of their crime." "No, but I benefited from it my entire life. And then I treated you terribly when it all came to light." He stared down at his untouched drink. "I am trying to figure out who I am now, outside of Dad's shadow, outside of the Mitchell name and fortune. I know something about identity crises," I said with a small smile. "It gets better, not easier, necessarily, but clearer." We parted with a tentative plan to meet again, the possibility of some new relationship neither of us could yet define. Eleanor continued her work with Missing Children's Foundations, channeling her guilt and remorse into something constructive. We maintained limited contact, primarily through her therapist, who facilitated occasional meetings as part of Eleanor's rehabilitation process. Forgiveness remained complicated, but understanding had begun to take root. As for my professional life, I found myself at a crossroads after the case concluded. My architecture career had been built within Mitchell Enterprises, and my association with the scandal made some firms hesitant to hire me. After months of interviews and rejections, I made a bold decision. I established my own small architecture firm, Morgan Winters Design, specializing in community centers and facilities for trauma survivors. My first major project was designing a resource center for families of missing children, funded partly by the restitution from the Mitchell estate. The building incorporated elements symbolizing hope, connection, and resilience, themes that had come to define my own journey. The irony was not lost on me that Richard's attempt to erase Morgan Winters had ultimately led to her name being prominently displayed on buildings across the city. Sometimes justice takes unexpected forms. My personal life took an unexpected turn as well. During a fundraiser for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I met Ethan Clark, a forensic psychologist who specialized in helping reunited families navigate the complex emotional terrain of reconnection. He had read about my case professionally before meeting me in person. "I promise I am not some weird case stalker," he assured me during our first conversation. "I just happen to work in this field and think what you have done with your experience is remarkable." Unlike Marcus, who had fled at the first sign of difficulty and returned only when my story became sensationally public, Ethan understood the complexity of my situation without needing simplified explanations. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding of the unique challenges I faced. When I finally brought him to meet the Winters, the visit felt natural, not the strained introduction I had anticipated. As we left their home that evening, Ethan observed, "They have your smile. Or, I guess more accurately, you have theirs." "It still surprises me sometimes," I admitted. Seeing physical traits reflected back at me after a lifetime of looking nothing like the Mitchells. The most profound change, however, was not external but internal. I had begun the process of integrating my two separate identities, the person I had been raised to be and the person I would have been without the kidnapping. Neither identity was complete on its own, but together they formed the complex, resilient woman I had become. I purchased a modest home halfway between Seattle and Evanston, allowing me to maintain connections to both cities that define different aspects of my life. The design incorporated elements of both the Mitchell aesthetic I had grown up with and the warmer, more personal style of the Winters home, not a rejection of either influence but a thoughtful integration of both. On the 1-year anniversary of the DNA test results that had confirmed my true identity, I visited the Seattle cemetery where Elizabeth Ann Mitchell was buried. I placed flowers on the small grave of the baby girl, whose death had set in motion the tragedy that shaped my life. "In another reality we might have been sisters," I said quietly to the small headstone. I am sorry for what your loss did to your parents and to mine. Later that evening, gathered around the dinner table with the Winters, I proposed a new tradition. Each year on my birthday, I would like to celebrate not just my birth but my rebirth, the day we found each other again. Catherine, eyes shining with tears, raised her glass. To Morgan Cassandra Winters, beloved daughter, finally home. David added, and to the remarkable woman you have become, through everything life has thrown at you. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me throughout the tumultuous legal proceedings. The past could not be changed or undone. The kidnapping would always be part of my story. But it no longer defined me completely. I was Morgan Winters, found after 28 years. I was Cassandra Mitchell, with a lifetime of memories and accomplishments. I was both, and something more, a woman who had reclaimed her identity and was building a life that honored all parts of her complex journey. The path forward would not always be easy. There would be complex emotions, difficult anniversaries, and ongoing legal proceedings related to the Mitchell estate. But for the first time since learning the truth about my origins, I faced the future not with confusion or anger, but with hope and a hard-won sense of who I truly was. My story is unique in its details, but perhaps universal in its message about identity, resilience, and the complicated nature of family. If my experience has resonated with you, please consider supporting organizations that help families of missing children by sharing this video or donating to reputable foundations. Like and subscribe if you would like to hear more stories of family secrets and their aftermath, and share in the comments how you have navigated your own identity journeys. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to our most authentic selves. Family is not just who we are born to, but also who we choose to become.